And we are now recording.
Calling half an ordinance meeting to order.
Madam Chair, if you'd like me to begin, if I may,
Yes.
I would ask if we can move an item to the top of the agenda. I think most of the people are here tonight, as well as our town attorney, to discuss the voting day / referendum and the draft questions and the public hearings that have been advertised. Okay. If you'd like for Tessie to go ahead and start,
Yes.
and I'm sure there's plenty of folks that have perhaps questions or inquiries or whatever.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, so I am here today regarding the notice of public hearings. At the last town council meeting, we had decided to go ahead and advertise for a public hearing regarding the referendum issue with the armory and also with the community center. And just as a little bit of background, we had written to the Attorney General and asked for the Attorney General's opinion about just having more of an informal voting day. And the Attorney General did share the opinion with me that, what we were proposing was dangerously close to a referendum. So specifically, they were concerned, the Attorney General's office was concerned about just limiting it to registered voters in the town. And the Attorney General's office was also concerned with, having ballots or a type of balloting system and also accounting for absentee ballots and things like that. And so the Attorney General, with that part at least, said, it was getting close to a referendum. Now, to note the referendum, the difference here is that the referendum is something that has to be authorized by the town charter. So that's why we're here today. What a referendum is it is essentially an election on one issue. So it allows the voters to decide a specific issue or a question. But there are specific steps that have to be followed in order for the town to even get to the point of conducting this referendum. So at the next town council meeting, there's 2 public hearings, and I believe they were in the committee's packet. And the 2 public hearings are discussing, and what these public hearings are about is simply whether or not the town wants to vote to ask the General Assembly to change its charter to authorize these 2 referendum elections. So that's all the notice of public hearing is about. But we had to go ahead and do this because, the General Assembly will be meeting again in January. And so what I drafted 2 notices of public hearing. And the reason for that is because of the way that the Virginia statute, the Virginia Code is worded, I believe that it would need to be a specific amendment to the town charter for each separate questions. And we have been talking about adding, whether it is the advisory referendum on the armory or whether it is a question of does the town want to do a community center. And so what's coming up with the town council meeting on the 16th is just a question of does the town council want to go ahead and ask the General Assembly if they would go ahead and make this charter change. So then if they do make the charter change, then that's when the town is authorized to draft the referendum. Now, we had talked at the last meeting about going ahead and drafting a referendum question that we would put on the ballots. So, and just a little bit of background about that process. is once the General Assembly makes the charter change, at that time, that is when we will actually submit a petition to the circuit court in Nottaway, and that is when we will have that specific question on there. That question will be, or questions in this case, since we have two charter changes, those two questions will be presented to the judge. And the judge will approve the questions and the form of the questions at that time. Make sure that the questions comply with the code requirements, and that's when the judge will also go ahead and set a date for the election. So, and depending on when we get this authorization is really going to influence when the judge is going to set the election, because there's certain requirements for it with the different dates that are set forward in the code. So that's where we are with things. If you all want to go ahead and formulate a question, that would a later time, or questions to be presented to the judge, you can certainly do that. The code does require that it be a yes or no question, which is kind of why we have to have these two separate charter amendments, because we can't have an either or a multiple choice question. So if we're going to explore that possibility tonight, my recommendation would be to come up with a simple yes or no plain English question to present to the voters. So I tried to put something somewhat specific in there, but it's not the ultimate question, which is, do you believe that the town of Blackstone should use its funds to construct, repair, remodel, and or improve the Harris Memorial Armory? Check yes or no. But ultimately, that's a decision that will have to be approved by the judge once we get the permission to even ask the judge for those questions.
And in your packet at your desk, on the last page, is 3 questions that the mayor submitted to use, possibly.
Do you all have any questions for me at this time about the process or the procedure that we need to go through in order to have this done, or?
So basically, we get the questions together, then we present them to you to take, correct?
Correct. So in summary, while we have the charter changes now, we don't have to have the exact wording of the questions until these charter changes have been approved, and that's when we take it to the judge. But if we want to do it now, we can, but it's not necessary at this time.
Okay. You said also it have to be a yes and a no question, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And I think what was referred by the mayor here was for the health and ordinance to possibly come up with questions.
I think that's the actual purpose of the meeting, to see if there's a recommendation to the full council of what you would like to do. Do you want to do one of them or both of them? We advertised simply because we were up against a deadline for advertising. So we advertised on the 4th and the 11th in order for us to meet the deadline for the 16th. I don't think we necessarily had to advertise twice. We do it as a matter of practice. I think it was just 10 days before the
Correct.
meeting. So we did the 4th and the 11th, and that's typical advertising we would do for any public hearing we normally have. But state code only requires a 10-day period from the advertisement date to the actual public hearing.
Do we expect to do that
You
now?
want to read the
Well, I say we formulate questions at the end of the meeting.
Okay.
And I think if you look at the dollar figures that are in the notice of public hearing, I think that's one thing that we probably need to clarify. I used the same engineering or architectural study that was provided by Brian Green, who is, I don't know if he's an actual contracted architect for you guys or
He's your
A friend.
He's just a contractor. He's the architect of the Commonwealth Architects.
Brian Green had done up some cost estimates already for armory renovation, for a new swimming pool, and then an indoor community center or basketball venue. And those are the numbers that we have. I think if you add them together, I think the community center was in excess of $5 million, and I think that the armory figure that Brian provided us was $2.3 million.
How many estimates did we get? Just one or?
Just that one. I just used the one now. I am of the opinion that the sizes, the total square footage are very big buildings. I mean, extremely large. And I'm not sure that necessarily is required of Blackstone to build a 19,000 square foot swimming pool or a building to enclose a swimming pool. But we did run those figures by our architects or our engineers, B&B consultants, and they did confirm the per square foot cost was within market.
Gotcha.
Okay? I just don't know if you need so big a building, a smaller building, but the per square foot cost would logically be approximately what was provided. And I think that the swimming pool was over $250 a square foot. And please, I can confirm these numbers. And the other was almost $200 a square foot.
Gotcha.
And I'll make copies of all that. I think it may have been more council.
Another thing to note is that, both of these are advertisements for advisory referendum. So the difference between advisory and binding is advisory advises the council on what it should do. Binding means the town would be 100% bound to vote those results. So.
So on the 16th, for everybody in attendance, there will be a formal public hearing before the entire town council. Whether you have a recommendation to them or not, I don't know. It's a pretty pointed issue. But it does appear, and after speaking with Senator Ruff and with Delegate Wright, Senator Ruff recommended that the legislation, if passed by council or the request passed by council, is submitted both to the Senate and to the House of Delegates. So we did speak. I spoke with Tommy today, and I spoke with Frank last week, and Tommy was pretty familiar. Apparently, he's done something similar to this before, because he did mention that there were original documents need to be submitted along with the request, all those kind of things. So he was very familiar about the public hearing and all the other process. So maybe another locality had approached Delegate Wright with the same issue or a similar issue, making a charter change, and so both of them are aware, and they await town council's decision. Whether they will move forward. And I don't know if there's anything else to present to you, or if you have any other ideas. Madam Chair, if there's somebody in the audience that you would like to recognize, or maybe they have some advice for you, but I think it's pretty cut and dry. And do you want to do the Armory, or do you want to do a community center? I think what it all boils down to, are you willing to pay X number of dollars for this or X number of dollars for that? Or not do anything.
Do you want to read the questions that
I
the
can.
presented?
Yeah.
You need your glasses?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. This is an email dated November 19th. I think it's in your packet, the last page, from the mayor. He says his personal recommendation for the possible referendum would be to have only 3 questions. There's no need to have an option to do both projects because the town simply can't afford both, and I echo those sentiments. We'd have to make the ballot so that you can answer one question. I'm not sure how it works. Question number 1, should the town of Blackstone spend up to, and this says $2.1 million approximately to renovate the Harris Memorial Armory for a multi-use community center, yes or no? Number 2, should the town of Blackstone spend up to blank $1 million, and I think it was in excess of $5 million, almost $6 million, I think, for those 2 projects. And I think the number Brian Green had actually put on the Armory was $2.3 million. Approximately to build a new recreation center with indoor swimming pool and indoor track, yes or no? And question number 3, should the town of Blackstone do neither project, yes or no?
Yeah. And I will say with number 3, that's probably a little bit tricky to do. If you all want to do it, we probably would have to do an additional public hearing for that. But trying to think about how to word that may be a little bit tricky, but if that's what you all want to do, we can figure out number 3 in a way to get
I
it
think he
done.
said something extra at the bottom below that about the, maybe
See,
not need, maybe you
We
might.
could
wouldn't need the
eliminate
third
question
one.
number 3 for simplicity. If a voter opposes both projects, they can simply vote no to both.
Yeah, and I think that may be the easiest thing to do to avoid any confusion, but.
But again, those are the figures that have been presented to us. Okay? Should we get a second opinion? Probably. Okay? But as far as deadlines go, we've got to move forward to get this to the General Assembly this year. Okay? If it's the intention of council to have a date set for an election in the upcoming year, we're at deadline now. We have to have this public hearing and have Tommy and Frank both submit the legislation. And if it's going to happen, you have to move forward. The figures themselves, we can modify those with the committee or building and grounds or the full council and determine, are these numbers we want to use, or do we want to use another professional figure? I'm not an architect, Des is not an architect, but I do think, to be fair to the voters and the people who are going to be involved in this, what is the exact figures that council endorses and that everybody believes will be accurate? And that would create a cap, not more than this amount of money. But I'm of the opinion we don't need a 19,000 square foot swimming pool.
Okay, and that's what I was getting ready to say. Based on that size, it's gonna cost the 5 million, so should we be looking at something smaller to get a more
I'm of the
sensible
opinion,
number?
I would recommend not building something that grandiose.
Yeah.
But I think if you stick with the sizes, square footages are good. But if you look at the total size of the building, I think it skews the number. That's what makes it $5 or $6 million bucks.
Yeah,
And I think it'd still be expensive irregardless, but I think we may want to consider the size of the building. I don't think you got to worry about how much each square foot costs, but do you really need that big a swimming pool, or do you want a smaller swimming pool, kind of a thing? Do you need an indoor track, or do you need somewhere where you can play basketball and have recreation programs? Okay? And I think those numbers are different than the $6 million, because you can compress and change the size. And I think that in fairness, but also in fairness, I use the same figures that were provided to us.
Gotcha.
Without putting
gotcha.
them through a filter or anything else like that. We just talked about that.
But I guess the question is, do we want to put something out if it doesn't make sense? I mean, we know we cannot afford something that big. I mean, for 5
You certainly
million.
can't afford both. That's not a good
Exactly,
idea. I
yeah,
think there's
yeah.
been some folks that have, maybe we do both of them. You know, I caution thee about such things. We know, I believe in my heart, that VML Vaco did their review based on the $2.3 million figure that had been provided by Mr. Green, and they gave their report. And this is what the operations and the debt service, and this is what it would result in. I don't know if we'll have time to do that, but I think something kind of similar needs to be done if you're gonna go on the opposite side. I think there's passions both ways, and I think we need to treat it fairly so that no one can sit back and say, well, that was clouded, it was too high of a number, that was, I think you're right,
Yeah.
we do need to, pare down the size of it perhaps.
Yeah.
Because I just don't think you'll ever build that big of a facility. Nor do we need that big of a facility. Did we answer your question?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Stay.
Philip, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Hi, y'all. Within the referendum question, would it be a good idea to include the estimated yearly cost of maintenance, upkeep, and operations within the question, so people would have an idea of not only what the base cost to build it would be or renovate it, but also what it would cost the taxpayer to run it as well? Because I think that's good information to have as well.
It is, yeah.
And another thought about that is there are, and I'm not saying that that's not a good idea for any means, but just putting everything I know out there, there are other things that we can do too to educate the voter, like statements that are provided with the referendum and things like that, that are prescribed in the code that I would write in plain English, as the code says. So, you know, just another thought too, if we have a lot of stuff that we want to put in the question, but we can't get it all in.
And certainly we'll calculate what kind of a tax increase or any kind of increases in fees or something, we need to factor it in just like we do.
It's a good question,
Thank you.
yeah,
May I ask another question?
sure.
Only if it's a good one.
I don't know, we'll let y'all decide. But the other question would be, I think it was, I don't remember if it was September, October, when Tom posed that he found within the budget a certain amount of money and that the town would not have to raise taxes because we would have that budget, we would have that money already, and then just have to find $11,000 more or something
Yeah,
per
but
year to meet that note. So would we have that discussion within there that, you know, we can do the armory with this, but, you know, we would need this much more to do the other? I mean, are we gonna talk about where we have funds available?
No.
Hey, welcome back.
Not the referendum, I think it's a
Not the
yes or no
referendum.
question. I
Okay,
think
so
I'll
that
just-
would be a public discussion question then.
Pretty much.
Okay.
It should be because we discussed this before, the armory is almost zero cost to the town where there's no grants at all available for the other project. So when you look at the taxpayer, if you consider a taxpayer as a state taxpayer, it costs, but as a town taxpayer, it's a different cost for each project, so that's something we think is important. And the education part of that.
Yeah,
Yeah, because that is a game changer, you know, if we can get grants versus not grants.
Which is reported in the DNL report that there were grants available.
I do believe, and I think Bob Lauterberg echoed the sentiment that we believe that the project would likely garner, he put 500, I think a little bit more than that, but up to $700,000, I believe, could be had without finding different resources or different sources. Those are the sources that we're familiar with.
That's 700 less than the 2.3.
700 less, but you still got to apply, it's still competitive and all that sort of thing. But I think in my 20 years of fooling with grants and things, I think that is a reasonable expectation, not unreasonable. He put down $500,000 in his report to be on the conservative side. He's familiar with things like IRF, and we all know the same faces and the same names, and so IRF is usually about $600,000.
gotcha. Any other questions anyone may have?
Sure. Can I ask you a question, please?
Yes.
All right, with the rec center, the combination being roughly $5 to $6 million, give or take, and it's 19,000 square feet. We're talking about reducing the size.
I don't think we need to build a building that large.
All right, are you talking about the size of the pool and the track, or just the entire
It
building?
was 19,000 square feet just for the swimming pool, as proposed by Mr. Green,
All right, now, when,
which is too big. We don't,
but
if
what?
we don't have a swimming pool, we don't need that big a swimming pool.
But we might, because if you look at it as, if you get an Olympic-sized swimming pool, you can, no, stop and listen now. You can then bring tourism in by way of sports venue. You can now run swim meets here. You can run track and field.
I will share with you my experiences that we've all had in our town. If you build it, they will come, right? We built a beautiful baseball facility. You know how many tournaments we've had there? Nothing but the state tournaments. There's been no additional tournaments.
But have we,
Because-
but we haven't marketed it through
Sure.
tourism yet, correct?
Certainly we have. They're not here necessarily coming to Blackstone. I think we have some day stuff, you know, where 3 or 4 teams may get together. But as far as these large tournaments, like my son plays in travel ball in
Yeah.
Hanover County or Prince George County, there's not the amenities, there's not a hotel room, there's not.
That was gonna be my next thing, yeah. We don't have what.
In part why. I don't think it's the field necessarily, because we could certainly host a softball tournament and all those kind of things. But I think we're behind the Hanovers and the Prince Georges, not because of the quality of the facility or the quality of the program. I think it's because there's nowhere for my dad to stay, or there's nowhere to sit down and have a cocktail after the game or any of those kind of things.
And this, you know, I've been reading up on that stuff, and that's exactly what they say, especially in the sports plan.
So, I mean, we can plan on those things, but I don't think we can have an expectation that will be overrun with swimming meets. I think we may have some, but I don't think that we
But
should. have an expectation to spend $2 or $3 million with the hope or the expectation that will happen. I think some of it will happen, but the baseball complex has not produced what even the rec association, Kenny Procyse, and those folks were very optimistic about those kind of things.
But if we don't have the amenities for them here, there is no,
I think that's the issue as much as anything, that's the number of hotel rooms and this one.
has this been presented to those people very interested in the recreation building?
Recreation. Oh, you mean for that? For the indoor track? I don't know. This is the first conversation I've had publicly.
Okay, well, no, because I like comparing apples to apples. So put everything we can for both sides out on the table.
There'll be ample time for discussion and all this kind of thing. I don't know the best way to do it. We gotta feel our way. This group, they're citizen soldiers just like everybody else, and they're feeling their way through this. Tessie may have more experience than any of us all combined, but we're gonna find out what's the fairest and best way to do it. There's no intention to try to mislead anybody or try, I think council's looking for direction from the citizens, and rightly so, fair assessment. So, as far as the operations go as well, and I'll touch very quickly, I think that there were some questions that Bob Lauterberg, when he looked at his report, the estimation from the previous report, I think that community partners did, we actually used that portion for the operations, was about $104,000, $105,000 a year in operations. The majority of which was gonna be donations or gifts or those kinds of things. And so when you look at what Mr. Lauterberg's report was, he showed a $50,000 cost, okay? Yes, you'll rent it, yes, you'll do some of those kind of things, and there'll be some revenues from that, but will it cover the entire cost? And I think there's been some discussion that the operations and the expenses are the same, or the revenues and expenses are the same, really not. So he did include half, for not having a better methodology, he only put in about half of it, would be fundraising instead of fund. Any other questions?
Can't think of any.
Any other questions from the citizenry?
So then we'll still have to work on the question.
Don't feel like you're pressured into decision, but I do think that this needs to be on the forefront, because I think Tommy, right, and Frank, if they are gonna introduce legislation, they're gonna have an expectation that they're gonna know what that is going to be. So I think certainly the night of the 16th, if you don't make a decision tonight or make a recommendation, I do think we need to be looking for, before leaving on the 16th, we have to have that wrapped up.
Now, the proposed charter change language is fully contained in the 2 notices of public hearing. Because we don't necessarily have to be, as specific as the question we will present to the judge with our charter change. We just need to make sure we have authority to conduct the referendum hearing.
I think it'd be better city waiting and creating the questions when we have the entire council.
Would you like for some discussion, maybe, me to provide copies to you of similar type project, but maybe on a little bit smaller scale?
Joe?
Yeah,
That'd be good.
Maybe not an Olympic-sized swimming pool, maybe something a little less than an Olympic-sized swimming pool, or some combination thereof. It just, like I said, I think that our engineers and architects were comfortable with the square footage cost of what I need.
Well, what about putting terminology in the question as far as the Armory goes? That building can be up for grants, assistance. I'm not so sure about the community center, but I know for a fact that the Armory can be up for grant assistance.
Legally, the requirement would need to be that, it was as clear as possible. I know that's one thing the judge would be looking for, and as long as it can be answered in a yes or no question. So I think that, while the code doesn't mandate this, the code does err on the side of, simple. And then the other thing I can do is, and I've researched this some, is to, get that specific code section too that talks about those voter explanations that can be drafted and used to that, would be approved. Because that may be one way that we could get out some other additional.
Mr. Morgan asked a question about grants and that sort of thing, and I do believe, we've been over the Armory, what I believe is available there, practically, there may be more, but I don't think necessarily would be appreciably less. For a new building, a standalone building, I don't think that there's nearly the pool of grant monies that are available for brand new structure. I think you're going to be more on your own to come up with the cash or the money. There's some discussion about the county participating and making more of a county-wide type of thing to be seen. Whether some of the citizens who are in support of that kind of facility can garner that kind of support from the board. But I would say that the likelihood of grant funds for a new facility are far less than they are for renovating an existing. Okay. And so the Armory has been included in the second phase of the East End project and is also included in our rehabilitation zone that we have. There's a resolution that was recently adopted for a potential housing project in the neighborhood, and the diagram does show that as part of that rehabilitation zone, which is required by Virginia Housing Development Authority for those kinds of purposes, but it is also included in that area for the town. Okay. It just gives us another tool in the chest to try to do some more stuff, as well as, and I'm probably barring everybody now, our comp plan does include Dinwiddie Avenue as an urban development area. We had to declare some urban development areas in order to be eligible for certain grant monies. And if you remember, we applied for some grant money for South Main Street, getting sidewalks and things down to Walmart and all that sort of thing. One of the things that VDOT wanted was us to decide where urban development areas likely were to happen in town. And new areas, if you remember the Gravett Farm up on Northwest Avenue, there's much talk and many homes and business and things going on up there. Northwest Avenue was declared an urban development area, potential urban development area. South Main around Walmart, obviously, for that particular project. And Dinwiddie Avenue from Main to the eastern corporate limits was also included. So we can share that with you guys at any time. But again, another tool in the chest if there were going to be any kind of dollars, or perhaps even tapping into some VDOT dollars for TAP 21 projects or sidewalks or curb and gutter access, that sort of thing.
May I ask another question? It's actually just more of a comment. With the discussion of the Olympic-sized pool and the ensuing discussion about that community center with the pool and the track and everything, I recall a strong discussion about wanting it to be large enough for high school participation in swimming sports. So my question would be, is there a regulation that it has to be Olympic size?
No, I don't know how
For
big
the school,
is it 25 meters?
I don't
I
know.
watched
I
the
don't
Olympics,
swim
it was
like
25
that.
and
I'm
25
dog
bags.
All I know is Brian said that you couldn't have a pool the size of the country club for a whole town. And there was a discussion about how big a pool you would need for a town, municipality versus a club. And I think he just threw out a number because that's what everybody's feeling is the same size pool. So again, I think it's room for adjustment.
What I'm getting at is that if part of the plan for that is to include the school system so that they can add swimming to their repertoire of sports, then the pool would have to be that regulation size that allows them to do that, correct?
Yeah, it would make
So
sense to
it
me.
may be that you can't move to a smaller pool if that's one of the intentions and one of the big selling points that we're gonna be bringing swimming to our high school.
And maybe that is the role of the board of supervisors.
You have to make
To
sure
add
the school
to, maybe
wanted to
we
add
do the
that to
basics, and if you
it.
want it big enough for
So we
school.
have to check if they
Yeah.
wanted to add that.
It won't pay teachers.
I agree.
Okay.
Could be a long list.
So I think that's a conversation we may need to get with them to have, to ask them some questions. What can they do to help out with it?
I can find out from the athletic director. Is that still Pete over there at the high school? Is the same fellow that was over there? I can talk to
Yeah,
the
Peter
athletic
Grimes.
director and find out how big a swimming pool needs to be. And maybe use that as the base. Like I said, I watch the Olympics and it's 25 meters down and 25 back, and I guess that's how big it is. But
I would think if they're gonna have needs, the pools have to be the same, it has to be a regulation size, because like, you can't have a ball field that's a little bit smaller.
I'll be honest with you, and this is me speaking, not as a taxpayer here, but are we building it for the high school, or are we building it for the citizens of Blackstone?
I think we build it for the citizens of Blackstone, but I think the selling point is that the high school would be able to use it for that. I think that's been one of the stronger selling points.
But I think the
for it.
county needs to pay for that difference.
I would agree. with
Exactly,
that.
yeah.
If you want to have a swim team, by God, you can have a great one. Yeah, but we gotta.
Have they voiced interest in wanting a swim team? Have they voiced interest in wanting a swim team?
I haven't received any comment that they were interested in a swim team. No.
They were interested in what?
No one's come to me, and the question was, has the school system approached me or the town about a swim team, and they have not, that I'm aware of.
You approached them.
I have not.
So I think that's something we may need to do, yeah.
We have a very receptive new school superintendent. I think she's still finding her way. But my initial experience with Dr. Grimes is that she's very friendly. She's upfront. You don't have to worry what she's thinking. And I think that she'll be more than happy to work with us on the old buildings and all those kinds of things. She's shown a real willingness to try to work with the town. So, yeah, I will find out whether they have interest in the swim team, either
And
with
then
Dr.
how
Grimes
about
or
the
with
Board of
Pete.
Supervisors, have we talked to them at all?
I think that there's been a citizen that's been talking to some of the Board of Supervisors members, who's very optimistic about them participating. I have not, but I would like, if we are gonna do that, have council endorse a request for funding. That way it's not your lowly local bureaucrat just asking for some money that, because if it comes from council in a written format, I think they have an obligation to respond in a written format to you, and that would require an action.
Gotcha.
That's all I have. If you all want me to stay, I would be glad to stay. If you all want me to go, I would be glad to go too. Just let
Thank
me
you.
know what you want me to do.
Thank you.
So I'll have these questions in the council packet for the
Yeah,
16th.
'cause I think we all should be involved in creating these questions.
But
I
are
think-
y'all kind of
Yes,
liking these questions?
yes. I mean, the questions are,
So I'll include this in the council packet for December.
I'll see what I can do about the figures.
Exactly, yeah, more
We can get
accurate
those fixed.
price on the recreation part of it.
And I'll come back to it, hopefully some ways we can make sure the voters know everything about the referendum questions, whatever it may be.
Oh,
Thank
yes,
you.
I think they'll be fair enough, so everybody won't say, okay, well, this price, it didn't make sense,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right.
okay, move on.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
I think I will. I have my glasses. You'd be happy to know. All right. Additional items, and the first one on the agenda was historic business district / churches. Concerns raised by certain individual to the mayor who inquired how was it possible that a church is being proposed where the old herb cottage property used to be. Well, because the zoning permit, our zoning is BG zoning, and that's a general overlay. That's a general overlay of all the areas that are currently commercial. The purple areas in Blackstone, and including, if you remember, we rezoned that a little bit over here at the Gravit Farm. The areas that are in purple already by right, in a zoning ordinance, you have a by right activity. It's like I want to open a restaurant, it's a by right, they don't have to go through the zoning, or you need to use permit. In the BG district, by right is church. They can build a church in the BG district or open a church in the BG district. And I think the town council had made the decision at the time in 1992, they wanted to blanket, make sure that there was no area of town that would prevent a church from being built. You may remember, Barbara, I think you were still on council, but when that ordinance was adopted, I think pretty much every district does permit a church as a use by right. Okay? That's how it happens. Now, I think that the referral was, do we want to continue in that form and fashion? Do we want to exclude them from certain areas? Do we want to exclude it from certain locations? I think Zach is still here. I don't know if, I hope I say this right, I don't know if a church generates the type of activities, not the type, but the volume of activities, perhaps, that we would want to see downtown. We want to see merchants and sales and sales taxes and meals taxes and all those kinds of things. I think for the town, coffers, maybe a church isn't the most profitable, okay? But I think there's an ethical side of it too. And what are the ethics of it? Do we want to make it inclusive? Do we want to have every district available for churches? Do we want to encourage people to do those kinds of things? I myself would say yes. We want to encourage those kinds of things, but is it on your main street the most revenue producing? It's not going to be, obviously. And it may be used, depends on how active, but certainly Sundays and then night or two during the course of the week.
Sure.
So I just wanted to say that the issue arose when New Life Church located downtown where the Herb
Cottage.
banquet room used to be. They're wonderful people. We think that there may be some commercial component to their front space and maybe something in the back to where it's not just a church on a Sunday or a Wednesday night service. There could be some coffee shop component or some commercial thing, and that's great. But and it has nothing to do with them as a congregation at all. But Philip is correct in that conversation about churches on main streets are they making the best use of the commercial real estate and its value? And churches are wonderful, and I think that we can all agree on that, but like in Cambridge, Virginia, and other small towns and localities, when you see these churches downtown, that's why they're never gonna receive a Main Street designation. Because when you have non-contributing, in that technical term, uses of buildings, it hurts your tax revenue and that generation of that revenue, and your overall district stance as a commercial district. Retailers, restaurants, and service businesses and attractions, sure, that's a great thing, but those churches downtown, it's a fairly common practice and policy within Main Street communities that I'm aware of that you kind of want to be careful with, because what if 5 more come downtown for we do have a lot of vacancy rates, but if we are overrun with churches, when do you draw the line of non-contributing properties?
That's true.
It's a difficult question.
When I was at Lakewood in graduate school, 2007, 2009, the New Life Church had put in the daily grind right there on the corner where the brew house is now. And I remember as a grad student, I ate there every night because that was just the thing. And I believe it was the first coffee house on Main Street in Farmville. But I remember at the time, all of their revenue that they made from that went into missions. So they made revenue, it was a vital part of the downtown community. So if they have a plan for that, that kind of escalates them a little bit above just a church to a revenue producer with meals tax. Cha-ching. So I'm just throwing that out there that they did do that in Farmville and it was successful. But then I think the lease changed on the building and they let it go. That's, as I understand that, because I attended New Life at one point because they have a special needs program. And it's, like you said, really a great group of people. Truly good-hearted
And that's
people.
what the combination was.
Yeah. So if that's what they pitched, that they were going to have that combination, I think that's an asset to the town. And they can park in the town lot. They're not quite it up.
In the back.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of people in town Sunday. It was standing room only in the restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
That's nice.
There was so many people there, and the food was good.
So for the church,
I don't know
for
whether
the
the
church,
church. It was church. I think it was just a combination. The church people and people just coming
so
to the
the church
restaurant.
is open already? Because I thought they were still under construction.
I don't know whether they might be,
I
but
think Sunday lunch is a big day in
Yeah.
Blackstone for the restaurant. It's a pretty crowd.
there's a good crowd.
So the question is, do we want another one? Do we want to limit it?
It's only, It is permissible now by zoning. So any modification to the zoning ordinance would come through the planning commission first. And if you guys want to refer to the planning commission would work on it and come up with some ideas. Because downtown merchants, we have one here. There's also, I think Eddie's on the planning commission, he's a downtown guy. Let them hash it out a little bit. And since the planning commission, since it is a zoning matter, you can leave it as a zoning matter. If you were gonna restrict it in the historic business district, then that falls back on you guys.
Gotcha.
And if you want to, and we do have a defined area for historic business district. And if you want to do that and not necessarily exclude them from South Main Street at the intersection of 40 and 46, if a church wanted to go out there, you could still permit it with the zoning staying the same. But if you wanted to prevent it from downtown, I think that's historic business district, and that's the town council. I think this is the purview of this committee.
So that would not go to planning commission?
No, because the historic business district is a town council, strictly function. Planning commission is charged with doing things like modifying the zoning ordinance, conditional use permits, rezoning, that sort of thing. And the board of zoning appeals is charged with variance requests, which are.
Yeah.
I'm asking for a relaxation of the rules so that I can fit my project onto a piece of property that may otherwise not meet the standards because of parking or something like that.
The thing is, if it's just them, but if you have the problem where, 2 or 3 other said, okay, well, we coming to town, then that's when you can see a problem. So.
So then you could limit to one in the historic business district?
You said you can?
You could.
You could, that would be, you guys and the full town council would ultimately have to approve, and the planning commission would not be involved in the historic business.
Okay.
It's kind of like they did the food trucks, the itinerant merchants, they're not allowed on town-owned property or in the historic business district.
And
So
that didn't go to planning commission. that was strictly
y'all
council
decided to
action.
do that with the food trucks too.
And just to clarify, DBI sentiment reflect that Virginia Main Street boundaries in the historic business district, not the full encompassing historic district. And I think that, with all due respect to New Life Church, if any zoning changes or any different policies were adopted, we would imagine that they would be grandfathered in. We're not
They
asking
would be.
them to
Yeah.
be grandfathered in.
They would
Yeah.
be grandfathered too.
Okay.
Their grandfather, in the event they were to, and I'm not as strict as some communities are, my interpretation as zoning administrator is, if I have a legal permit to do something, just because I may not be in operation, I don't start the clock ticking on 2 years, just because I'm not in operation. Okay? If I have a house sitting there, even though it's maybe unoccupied, some communities and their zoning folks will sit back and say, no one's lived in that house for 2 years, you've lost your grandfather. We don't do that. If it's a compliant use, permitted, in a compliant structure, I don't turn the clock on, because a grandfather is only good for, or a non-conforming use is a real legal term, is only good for 2 years. You get a 2-year window to operate a church. If you cease operating the church, that altogether, in some communities, it becomes null and void. And I've seen it a couple times. Powhatan's very strict about it. And I've literally seen people bankrupted over a zoning decision.
So would you say you would allow, the town of Blackstone would allow one church in the historic business district?
I don't think you can say that. I think you just would have to say no additional churches may be put in there.
So then if, just say that this church left, does that allow for another one to come in?
Within 2 years.
Okay.
Within 2 years. The permit is not specific to an individual. Mr. Eden was just in here, and we had the same discussion when it came to dance halls. Okay? Is the dance hall specific to an individual, or is the dance hall permit and the zoning specific to the site? And in zoning, we don't look at the folks, we look at the site.
So then you're saying they could only have a church in that building?
If they ceased operation for 2 years, they could not go back and do it, if we changed the rules.
Right, but I'm saying if you were to change the rules, are you saying that if they were to shut down, another church could not come in one of any C buildings that
I
he
would
owns?
say no.
No, they could go in that site because
They
the
could go with- no,
permit
they
is
could go
good
with
for
any-
2 years at that
Okay,
location.
okay.
Right, but
if
I'm
it's
saying,
after
but
2
they couldn't
years.
go in the old Pizza Hut building.
If the rules were changed, could not. It's in the historic district.
So you would allow for no additional
One site.
churches.
Not one church, but one location.
So you would allow for no additional churches and only a church could go in the building that it's in within 2 years.
If it meets the standards of grandfather.
Okay. Is that something y'all are ready to decide?
No.
You wanna think about it, talk about it, we'll move on?
Just think about it, think about it.
Shall we table for, till the next?
Yeah, I
one?
will, because last time we made a decision in the historical district, it just got blown out of proportion.
Property liens. Right now, the town of Blackstone's policy or practice for property liens is the following, and we only do them on certain issues, we don't do them all the time. Tearing down houses, we do those on property pretty often, and, fill the gutter and certain street improvements that are discussed in the town code. Right now, if I build curb and gutter in front of Lonnie's house, we've already got it, but say we were putting it in front of your house, it would be a 50-50 deal, okay? Based on the contract price we have with, this year, Jason Walker, and I assume perhaps in the future or another contractor, is $50 a linear foot, okay? You'd be responsible for half, the town would pay for half. Any sidewalk would be the full responsibility of the town of Blackstone, okay? So 50% of that curb and gutter, if somebody decides, hey, I want curb and gutter like we did 4th Street, or we did 4th Drive last year, somebody comes to me and says, yeah, I'd like it, I don't have the money to pay for it up front, however, I'm agreeable to your terms with a lien. And basically what it is a document recorded at the courthouse, so if anybody sells the property or is attempting to sell the property or doing research or title search on the property, they'll see that there's a restriction. And that restriction is the blanket term, which is a lien, says that you owe X number of dollars to the town. We don't charge interest. Okay? And I think that's the question, is does the town want to start charging interest? Okay? I don't think the request or the referral of this matter to the committee came whether we want to continue doing these kinds of things, a 50-50 deal, but do we want to do it at no interest? Okay? We don't charge any interest. And we get payments periodically from when properties sell. Ken Walden sent a dang gone check down here for $258, which was the assessment back in the 90s or in the mid-90s or whatever it was. Okay? So I have a personal opinion about it. One, it's hard enough to sell those improvements. At $50 a foot, think about it. If you got 100 feet of property, let's say you were doing both sides of your property. The Lonnie's cost at half would be $10,000 or more, I suspect. It's already mighty tough to sell this stuff. That's why we got away from trying to charge people for sidewalk. We used to charge 50% for the sidewalk as well. You can't sell an Eskimo that ice cream because I'm telling you, everybody's like, well, wait a minute. I understand the curb and gutter. I can get that because that's going to improve my property. It's going to make it cleaner and easier to do all the above things. But the sidewalk is for public use, not my use. And I don't want to pay it. And I can tell you, if you go to somebody and say, you got to pay for sidewalk, you're not going to get a real good response. So town council, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years ago, several years ago, decided that they would waive the 50% requirement for the sidewalk. We only charge for the curb and gutter. My personal opinion is, I'm a curb and gutter guy. It makes our life easier. No ditches, no pipes, no unhappiness, no work orders. I like doing curb and gutter. I would make the terms as practical as possible for the property owner. If anything, I would put a termination on it. Maybe it's only good for 10 years. After 10 years, you have to pay it. Or after 8 years, it would have to be paid something. But to make the terms even more difficult for the property owner to agree, just don't sell much curb and gutter. I'm just telling you. If we want to do curb and gutter, I do. Not council necessarily. But if we want to do that in many places around town, if you go up to, in your ward, if you go to Center Street, it's a tough sell already. And then you talk about a lien, that makes it tougher. And then you talk about, well, you know, a 6% interest or 5%, it makes it even tougher. So I would recommend leaving it as is. I'm a curb and gutter guy, and in order to make progress happen, I think keeping the terms as simple as possible.
I agree. I agree with that.
too, yeah. I mean, and like you said, if we did anything, like maybe just set it at a certain term, like in, I mean,
That may
within
be
10
something to look
years.
at, and say,
to
at
have
the
it
end of
paid.
10 years, if it hasn't been paid, then you're gonna have to start making payments on it, or do something, or the interest will accrue after the first 10 years, or something like that.
Yeah.
But then there are also a lot of projects that the liens are on property and they don't collect enough to pay for them.
Especially when the houses get built.
Yeah.
For the most part, the curb and gutter, those are pretty collectible.
Oh.
Okay? But I can tell you, when we tear these derelict houses down, and you've got one that you're gonna have to deal with 2 Mondays from now. If you remember the Agnes Green Hill Estate property on Dillard Street, okay? That thing's changed hands 2 or 3 times since I've been here, and it was a big mess, and who owned it, and it was a nightmare. But the house was built around a trailer, and it was falling down. It was horrible. It was that red cinder block house. I think it was a funeral home or a florist or something at one time. And it really had gone into disrepair, and there was an old trailer attached to the back of the house. It wouldn't have been that bad to tear it down, but it was loaded with asbestos. In order to tear it down, we did all that reports and all that kind, and we spent, I think the lien was $12,000.
Wow.
I think that's what we recorded at the courthouse,
And what did it sell for at auction?
$900.
$900.
Oh, wow.
You ain't gonna get your money back on these houses, I'm just telling you, because the houses that are distressed, the properties really probably aren't worth the cost of tearing down the house.
True.
And
Yeah, but
nobody,
if nothing
nobody,
else, it's assisting with drainage. I mean, once you put the curb and gutters in, it's really assisting with drainage and runoff and everything.
It makes it look better. I think that the folks that get that, I think are improving. But I can tell you, if the intention is to ever really fully collect and pursue getting the money for these houses,
Don't happen.
no.
and none of the families didn't wanna own it, did they?
I
Nobody
always try to get, when we do a house, you get 2 responses, you know, Jennifer will send out a letter. Okay, we have a process. She'll send out a letter and give them 30 days to respond. If we get a response within 30 days, it's gonna go pretty smooth. Sign this agreement and sign this payment agreement, you'll make $100 a month or $150 or whatever the amount is. Okay? If you don't get the response, I can tell you, you end up in court, and you gotta ask the judge to order it be torn down so that we can enter the property. And it's most likely you're never gonna get the money back. I don't know if we've ever gotten money back on any of those. We get, when the people are agreeable and sign the indemnity agreement and $100 a month or whatever, those usually work out pretty good. We may have to push them a time or two if they miss payments, but overall, if the person doesn't respond to you, you're gonna end up, a good example on Maven Avenue. The gentleman did respond to us on that one. I'll fix it, and he never fixed it. Didn't show up for court, and the judge said, take it down. That one on Maven Avenue, I bet you we have a $6,000 lien. There's a vacant lot. If you remember where Wallace used to live, it had a tree growing up through the roof. And we tore that one down.
Well, like you were saying, if you put a limit on it to 10 years and then you have to start making a payment, well, if they haven't made a payment in the first 10 years, they're not gonna make one after
It's
that.
unlikely. But the insurance could accrue after a certain period of time. Make it 5 years or something. I'm trying to find some way that we can encourage folks to do these improvements or participate in the improvements. But at the same time, trying to meet the spirit of what some on council think is
Yeah.
too favorable of terms.
But if you're comfortable with the program we got now, I say leave it like it is.
It makes it easier, it is,
Yeah.
it is. Because $25 a foot is already tough to sell.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know a little more about it than we do,
So-
so.
Do y'all want to leave as is? Do y'all
Yep.
wanna make that recommendation?
I make a recommendation, we leave it as is.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Blight and blighted properties. Blighted properties. Oh, and for your information, I know you guys just voted, but there was a comparison, Jennifer,
Yeah.
comparison both properties and what they do. I think we're hitting the housing portion of the blight pretty good. We really have torn down a bunch of old houses. And we've got 2 more on the hot topic. We're getting ready to tear down another one on Broad Street. And then we've got 2 more that we've contacted. Jennifer sent the letters. One has responded. In fact, I'm supposed to have a phone conversation with the 2 ladies that own it, who both live out of town. And that one's the one next to LD Harris's old shop. And then the property on Tunstall Avenue, we really haven't received any response on that one. We spent a lot of money tearing them down, a bunch of money. I think we've got a process down that Tessie's comfortable with, and Jennifer understands that we kind of, when this happens and the deadline passes, then we do the next step and the next step, and then we have service, you know, where we actually pay somebody perhaps to even service the papers to them. Yeah. But the problem that we have, if you remember, is not necessarily the houses, it's overgrown properties. Bushes, jungle, it just makes it look unsettling. If you remember, we had this question about a property that was down there on Brunswick Avenue. Do you remember? You remember, I remember. And Chessie at that time said, I don't see a crime here. I don't see it raising to the level that our code requires where it's a health or safety or a welfare issue. Looks bad.
Well,
May not be appealing to live next to.
hoarding is a health issue, isn't it?
What do you
Hoarding.
what?
A health issue, hoarding.
Sure it
It's
is.
considered a mental disorder now.
And protected, in a protected class.
Yeah, they are.
But
You
I
sure
think
they
the
are.
mayor is looking for ways to strengthen our ability to enforce or press people to not cut the grass. Jennifer's got that, with bushes and weeds and vines growing on top of houses, and I think those are the issues that are driving it. I think there's the one on Brunswick Avenue that I think the neighbors are consistently concerned with, and I think there's another one on Northwest Avenue. It's kind of an orange house on the left-hand side, just before you get to the old sawmill.
Yeah.
On the left side, they got vines growing on that kind of stuff. I don't believe, Tessie doesn't believe, that we have the ability to tell somebody to cut the vines outside your house. I don't know if we want to. But I think we got the houses, I think we got the grass, we got the junk cars. This is kind of that gray area that we haven't been able to pursue.
May I ask a question? I'm sorry, I really did mean to be quiet. I have a neighbor, and he has a very, very junky backyard
Behind you.
behind him. Yes. It would be lovely if the council could adopt beautification goals or something, because if I sit on my back deck, I see all this clutter in his yard, and it is so unattractive. It's embarrassing when I have people over, they look over, and the big conversation becomes, look at that junky backyard. I mean, it's just, it's
Again, the
just,
ordinances we have deal with health,
I know.
safety, welfare, it's gotta be a detriment to somebody. It's
How
gotta,
about beautification?
beautification is altogether something different.
I like beautification.
I like fences. I like big, tall board fences, and then the town
Yeah, we're looking
and
at
government is
that.
left. If you guys are prepared, we can discuss it tonight, but if you'd like, I can try to find a draft ordinance like the city of Petersburg has, and bring it back to the committee, if that's agreeable to you.
Yes, that would be
Is
good.
that all right? Then we're getting into a late hour, and we're gonna try to wrap this thing up. The next item that I see that Jennifer has here is a town lateral policy. The town's policies now are actually ordinances that are adopted, and the two that we found for the water and sewer are both included for your consideration. So everybody in the audience understands, and the members of council, when a new home is built, for example, okay? Like the townhouse on Bird Road or the house on 4th Street. The process is for water and sewer connection, okay? When they come to get their zoning permit, which is a requirement of getting a building permit, no building permit will be issued in the town of Blackstone by the county unless accompanied with a zoning approval from the town, okay? And that goes for electric permits and everything, all right? Any kind of building permit or any kind of permit, demolition permits, all that. So we issue a zoning permit. At the time of application for the zoning permit, we're not that crazy like a Chesterfield County where you gotta wait 6 weeks for a permit. We can fill them out pretty quick, and we'll do them literally that day while we're sitting here talking to folks. They also have to pay their water and sewer tap fees, okay? And that water and sewer tap fee is supposed to represent a per capita or a fairly apportioned cost of the capital improvements required to pay for serving these new structures, okay? Do we get it right to the penny? We don't. We've set a figure of $1,600 in the town of Blackstone. It's been that way since I've been around, okay? So a new house would have a $1,600 tap fee. That is the rule today. About 7 or 8 years ago, council, I think wisely, decided to scrap some of the calculations that they use on water and sewer tap fees. At the time, if you had an apartment building, and we used the lofts as the perfect example, it was very publicized, you had 25 apartments, okay? You paid a $1,600 tap fee, But the town's rules at the time, it was $1,600 per door. He had to pay $40,000 tap fee, okay? So what we've done, which is equitable, because at that time, a one-bedroom apartment and Walmart paid the exact same tap fee, $1,600. Okay? We've made it on meter size now. Because remember, it's a portion, pro rata share of the cost. If I'm using a lot of water or a lot of sewer, then I should pay a larger figure. So we base it on water meter size now. You get a 3/4 inch meter, like a house meter, it's $1,600. You put in a 2-inch meter, you're gonna be paying $12,000 or $15,000. Okay? So we do tap fees first. After the project gets going, the developer will typically come to me or Brenda or somebody and say, hey, I'm ready to go on and get my sewer stuff connected. They usually make sure the sewer's available before they buy the property, but let's say he's, all right, I'm ready to make my water and sewer connections. The town of Blackstone at that time, when they're ready to make a connection, will, if they need to, dig up the street and set the water meter. It is our responsibility to construct it, but we bill them for the materials and the labor, okay? At cost. We don't mark it up, we don't do any of that kind of stuff. So if Andre spends $1,500 putting in a water service, we charge property owner $1,500. The cost and the responsibility is theirs and borne by them, okay? On the sewer, the private property owner is responsible all the way back to the main, not to the meter. And when I say responsible, for the maintenance and long-term upkeep as well. And they install that sewer line, okay? The way it's been for years is typical, okay? One of the things that we've had some questions about is, what does the town do if you dig up the street? Who's responsible for that? And I can tell you, I think we could go back based on our ordinance and say, it's the developer's responsibility to reimburse the town for that. But we've never charged anybody for patching a spot in the road, okay? There's one up at Green's car lot right now. We're not gonna charge to put the asphalt back. But I think the Fire and Water Committee wanted to codify that, okay? And what I'd like to do again, and I think this got referred to you after the Fire and Water Committee discussed it, I think I would like to bring to you an ordinance that would modify the water and sewer, saying it's the town's responsibility for the paving of the road, okay? And the upkeep of the road, not the upkeep of that line. We need to keep that with them, because their sewers really have a lot of backups. And the worst thing that we could do is not so much on the new ones, but on an old sewer line, if we were to say, oh, we'll take the responsibilities for those, there's a lot of old Orangeburg pipe, old terracotta pipe, all those kinds of things that we don't want any part of. Okay? Old materials, old technology, makes for backups. Trees, roots, grass, grease, those kinds of things in those lines, we don't want that. But actual road construction itself and the recompacting of the road, they'll be responsible to do it, but the ultimate ownership and the ultimate paving responsibility will rely back to the town. They just need to get the trench filled back up so cars can drive over top of it. And I'll bring that to you in a written form at the next meeting of the year. You okay with that?
Sounds good.
That's what we're doing now, it's just not written yet. All right, that's all.
And that's the fun part, you can adjourn the
Looks like we
That's
got a busy
7:16.
agenda for next time, but we'll have things to actually formally vote on, and, so we got direction on which way to go, and you're gonna adjourn the meeting.
Yes. We adjourn the meeting at 7:16.
perfect.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye, take
Good
care.
question.